Previously, we'd had looked at the decentralized solution in this supply chain coordination model for product L. And the decentralized solution just involved all of the three partners in the supply chain making their choices sequentially, kind of like you did in the beer game. The wholesaler makes a decision, and then the distributor reacts to the wholesaler, and then the factory reacts to the distributor. But now we're going to look at a centralized solution. And in the centralized solution, we can have a scenario where the three parties work together in order to minimize the overall supply chain costs. Now, the good thing about the centralized model is that we've already got the model and the formulas in place here. And so all we really need to do is just adjust the process by which we get the solution, and we can find this centralized solution. So because the model is in good shape, we're going to just copy this entire tab. I'll do move or copy, and then create a copy and move it to the end of the workbook. And then I'll right-click and do a rename and just name this centralized. Okay, so nothing here has changed in terms of the formulas. Now, what we do need to adjust is the process. And so in this new process, we're going to simultaneously solve for all of these decision variables or changing cells. So let's just put in some starting values. That are fairly large, something like this. And I'll highlight the total supply chain cost at the bottom and say in green, because that's going to be the new objective. And so now we would just need to open Solver. And we'll make an adjustment to the solver parameters. So the biggest adjustment is to change the objective to be the total supply chain cost. We still want to minimize that. But now for changing cells, we've got 4 changing cells. The 2 cells for the wholesaler, and then the distributor and factory order multiples. Now, in terms of this constraint here, we'll change this slightly. Let's just do a change. And it would be safe enough to just go ahead and say that all 4 of these changing cells need to be greater than or equal to 1. Click OK. These 2 constraints were on the desired service level and the desired fill rate. And so those can remain. We're going to introduce a 99% desired fill rate solution here, but this same model can be used for a desired service level solution. Now we're going to put some other constraints into help solver in this case. So we're going to add a constraint that says that the reorder point is less than or equal to the effective maximum. And then add a constraint that the reorder point is greater than or equal to the mean lead time demand. And that will help solver zero in on the solution. And then the one final constraint that we need is that these 2 order multiples are integers. And the way we can enter that is we can highlight these in a constraint, and in the middle, change the drop-down to int, which is integer. And this should be our entire solver window for this problem. And so Solver has found the solution here. And so what we want to do is compare the centralized solution and the decentralized solution. In the centralized, all three partners work together to develop these decision variables in this strategy. And so there's a table here where we can compare these. So we're first going to link up the wholesaler, distributor, and factory costs to the decentralized tab. So if we do that, we'll link up the wholesaler cost, link up the distributor cost, row 66, and link up the factory cost. I'm clicking over to the decentralized tab to find those. So you can see that each of these is a reference to the decentralized tab. Now we'll total those together. Then we'll link these on the same tab here to the centralized solution. So the wholesaler centralized solution is a cost of $32.23. The distributor solution, cell B66, and the factory solution. So each of these is a reference to the cell, the appropriate cell on the same sheet. And we can sum those together. Now, the difference between the two is going to be important because it's going to determine how we potentially coordinate this supply chain. So the difference will just be for each party, the centralized solution total cost minus the decentralized. And so what we see is that the wholesaler is actually $1,338 worse off in the centralized solution. If we take centralized minus decentralized for the distributor is actually $167 better off in the centralized solution. They would prefer to be centralized, and the factory is quite a bit better off. In fact, $3,500 better off. And then if we look at the total supply chain, the total supply chain is $2,300 better off if we operate in a centralized mode. The question is, how can we do that? How can we provide incentive to the wholesaler to switch modes from decentralized to centralized? Because the wholesaler would prefer the decentralized. Well, if we look at the number of orders per year that the wholesaler makes, and we'll just reference that from here. We've got it calculated under the ordering cost. Wholesaler makes about 33 orders per year. So what we could do is provide them a rebate on their order that divides the increased cost of moving from the centralized mode back to the wholesaler. We'll call it a per order rebate. That would be the difference in their cost divided by the orders per year. About $40.28. Now the question is, who is going to provide this per order rebate to the wholesaler? Now this will be based on some type of a contract, but it seems like the factory should provide the bulk of it, but perhaps the distributor should provide some, maybe based on the amount of their savings. And so what we could do is we could look at the ratio of these savings. The total savings divided among these two parties would be J4 plus K4. If we take J4 divided by that, that would be the percentage that we could attribute to the distributor. In this case, about 4.5%. We do the same for the factory. We take the factory's reduction in cost divided by the total reduction for those two parties. These two percentages should add up to 100%, and they do. So what we could do is we could have the distributor pay about 4.5% of the per order rebate to the wholesaler. And we can have the factory pay about 95.5% of the per order rebate to the wholesaler. We don't really know the mechanics of how that would happen in terms of the payments. Maybe that the factory pays the distributor, who passes this on to the wholesaler, but we could have some kind of a contract that said how that worked. Now, let's see what that does to the overall cost if we use this system. Basically, what would happen is the wholesaler would have to pay their centralized cost, but that would be offset. We would subtract the orders per year times the per order rebate that they get, because that's an offset to their costs. And notice what that does. The wholesaler lands right back down at their decentralized cost. And that should satisfy them and potentially make them willing to pursue the centralized policies. And in their case, that's an increase in the order quantity. Now, the distributor is going to experience their centralized cost, but they're now going to have to pay part of the per order rebate. So this effectively adds to their cost. So we would add the orders per year for the wholesaler times the per order rebate, just the part that the distributor is going to pay. Now notice what it does to their cost. They're not down at the centralized level of cost, but they're also not as high as the decentralized level. We do the same for the factory. Take the centralized cost, and this effectively adds the orders per year times the per order rebate. And we should find the same thing. The factory is not going to be as low as their centralized cost in this mode, but they're not going to pay as much as they would in the decentralized mode. 95.77 is somewhere in the middle of their decentralized and centralized cost. But if we add all of this together, we find that the overall supply chain is now down to their centralized level of cost. So by providing this incentive to the wholesaler, we potentially could reduce costs throughout the supply chain.